It looks like the perfect community. The landscaping is immaculate, the amenities are beautiful, the neighbors seem friendly, and the HOA, the homeowners association that governs every aspect of life in this development, looks like nothing more than the organization that keeps the grass cut and the pool clean. But 60 days after you close on your new home, a certified letter arrives. Your HOA has just levied a special assessment, $18,500, due in 90 days, for structural repairs to the building's parking garage that the reserve fund, the fund that was supposed to cover exactly this kind of expense, cannot cover because it has been chronically underfunded for 11 years. You did not know about the underfunded reserve. You did not know about the deferred maintenance. You did not know about the 2 pending lawsuits against the HOA, the board member who resigned last quarter, or the engineering report that flagged the parking structure 18 months ago. You did not know any of it because nobody told you, and because you did not know what to look for before you signed that purchase agreement. I'm Engineer Vance, licensed forensic structural engineer. I have evaluated structural conditions in HOA-governed properties from Miami to Seattle, and I am telling you right now that an undisclosed HOA financial crisis is one of the most dangerous and most commonly overlooked liabilities in American real estate. Today, I am going to walk you through the 4 HOA red flags that every homebuyer must identify before closing, and what happens when you miss them. Before I walk you through the 4 red flags, I need to establish something that most real estate agents, most buyers' attorneys, and most financial advisors completely fail to communicate. An HOA's financial health is not a separate issue from the physical condition of the property you are purchasing. They are the same issue expressed in 2 different languages, one financial and one structural. And as a forensic engineer, I read both languages fluently. Here is the engineering reality. Every building system has a finite service life. Roofing systems in most U.S. climate zones have a service life of 20 to 30 years. Parking structure, waterproofing membranes have a service life of 15 to 25 years. Elevator systems require major component replacement every 15 to 20 years. Pool and spa mechanical systems require replacement every 10 to 15 years. Exterior painting and sealant systems on stucco, EIFS, or wood-clad buildings require renewal every 5 to 10 years. These are not unexpected expenses. They are mathematically predictable costs that a competent HOA board, advised by a licensed reserve study specialist, can project with reasonable accuracy decades in advance. A reserve study is the foundational financial planning document for any HOA. It identifies every common element with a finite service life, estimates the remaining useful life of each element based on physical inspection, projects the future replacement cost of each element adjusted for inflation, and calculates the monthly reserve contribution required to fund those replacements without special assessments. The Community Associations Institute recommends that HOA reserve funds be maintained at a minimum of 70% funded status. When that percentage drops below 50%, the risk of special assessments becomes significant. When it drops below 30%, special assessments are not a risk. They are a mathematical certainty. Now let me walk you through exactly what that looks like across all 4 red flags. The first and most financially dangerous red flag is an underfunded reserve, and it is the one that produces the largest and most sudden financial shocks for unsuspecting buyers. Every HOA with 10 or more units in most U.S. states is legally required to maintain a reserve fund and to disclose its current status to prospective buyers. That disclosure is buried in the HOA documents package, the CC&Rs, the bylaws, the financial statements, the reserve study, that your purchase agreement gives you a specific number of days to review. Most buyers hand that package to their real estate attorney, get a summary that says the HOA looks fine, and never see the actual reserve funding percentage. Here is what you need to do instead. Find the reserve study in that document package. Locate the percent funded figure. It will be expressed as a percentage on the executive summary page. If that percentage is below 60%, you are buying into a community with a structural funding deficit. If it is below 40%, you need to quantify your special assessment exposure before you close. Calculate the gap between the current reserve balance and the fully funded reserve target. Divide that gap by the number of units in the association, and that per unit number represents your maximum special assessment exposure on day 1 of ownership. I have evaluated communities where that per unit exposure exceeded $60,000. For a condominium unit that the buyer purchased believing the HOA was financially healthy because the monthly fee seemed reasonable and nobody flagged the reserve study before escrow closed. The second red flag is deferred structural maintenance, the physical accumulation of building system deterioration that results from years of underfunded reserves and inadequate maintenance programming. This is where my forensic engineering background becomes directly relevant, because deferred structural maintenance in HOA-governed properties follows predictable failure sequences that I have documented across hundreds of investigations. The most consequential deferred maintenance category in multi-story residential construction is parking structure deterioration. Concrete parking structures are subject to chloride ion attack from road salts tracked in on vehicle tires, freeze-thaw cycling in northern climates, and carbonation-induced corrosion of the embedded reinforcing steel. When the protective waterproofing membrane on the parking deck surface reaches the end of its service life and is not replaced, chloride ions penetrate the concrete, reach the steel reinforcement, initiate corrosion, and the expanding corrosion products cause the concrete cover to crack and spall. This process, once initiated, accelerates exponentially. A parking structure that requires a waterproofing membrane replacement at a cost of $200,000, a planned and manageable expense in a properly funded HOA, becomes a structural concrete repair project costing $800,000 to $2 million if the membrane replacement is deferred by 10 years. Under ACI 318 and the International Building Code Section 1604, structural concrete members must maintain their design capacity throughout the building's service life. When corrosion-induced section loss reduces the effective steel area in a parking structure beam or column below the design minimum, the member is in structural deficiency, a condition that triggers mandatory repair under most state building codes, and that creates significant liability for the HOA board members who deferred the maintenance that allowed the condition to develop. That liability, when it materializes into a repair project, becomes a special assessment distributed across every unit owner in the association, including you, if you closed escrow without identifying the deferred maintenance condition in the engineering documents. The third red flag is pending litigation involving the HOA, and it is the one that most buyers' attorneys flag, but most buyers do not fully understand the financial implications of until it is too late. HOAs become involved in litigation in three primary scenarios, each with a different financial risk profile for a prospective buyer. The first scenario is construction defect litigation, lawsuits filed by the HOA against the original developer or general contractor for defects in the common elements. This type of litigation is extremely common in condominium developments built during construction boom periods when quality control was compromised by production pressure. Construction defect litigation can take 3 to 7 years to resolve and can result in settlement proceeds that fund deferred repairs, which sounds positive until you understand that during the litigation period, the HOA may be prohibited from making certain repairs, may be carrying significant legal expenses that drain the operating budget, and may be unable to obtain conventional property insurance because the insurer considers the litigation a material risk factor. The second scenario is liability litigation, personal injury claims arising from slip and fall incidents, swimming pool accidents, or other common area incidents where the HOA's insurance coverage is disputed. If an HOA's liability insurer denies coverage for a significant judgment, the HOA must fund that judgment from reserves or through a special assessment. I have evaluated communities where a single personal injury judgment, combined with an insurance coverage dispute, resulted in a per-unit special assessment exceeding $12,000 that had to be levied within 60 days of the judgment becoming final. The third scenario is member versus HOA litigation, lawsuits filed by individual unit owners against the Association for Selective Enforcement, improper rule application, or failure to maintain common elements. While these suits are less likely to produce large financial exposure than construction defect or liability cases, they are diagnostic of a dysfunctional board governance environment that consistently produces poor financial decision-making, which is itself a predictor of future reserve fund deterioration and special assessment risk. The fourth red flag is HOA governance and management instability, and it is the most difficult to quantify, but the most predictive of future financial crisis of all four indicators. HOA governance quality directly determines the financial and physical trajectory of every community it governs, and the warning signs of governance instability are consistently documented in the records that prospective buyers have a legal right to review before closing. The specific governance red flags that engineer Vance looks for in HOA document review are these. Board member turnover exceeding 50% in any 12-month period indicates a governance crisis, either interpersonal conflict, financial mismanagement, or legal liability that is driving experienced board members to resign rather than continue serving. Management company changes within the past 24 months indicate that either the board is dysfunctional enough that professional managers refuse to continue the relationship, or the board has repeatedly changed managers in search of one that will not enforce financial discipline. Meeting minutes that consistently show quorum failures indicate an owner population that has lost confidence in the association's governance, a community-level signal of dissatisfaction that typically precedes elevated delinquency rates and accelerated reserve fund deterioration. And delinquency rates above 10%, the percentage of units whose owners are behind on HOA assessments, indicate a cash flow crisis that forces the board to choose between funding operations and funding reserves. And reserves almost always lose that competition. Let me take you into a forensic evaluation I conducted in the Miami Beach area in 2023, because this case brings all 4 red flags together in a single community with a financial and structural outcome that should be required reading for every condominium buyer in the state of Florida. The buyers were a retired couple who had sold their suburban home in the Midwest and were purchasing a 2-bedroom condominium unit in a 1982 construction mid-rise building on Miami Beach as their permanent retirement residence. The purchase price was $640,000. The HOA monthly assessment was $680 per month, which appeared reasonable for a building with a pool, fitness center, and covered parking. The buyer's real estate attorney reviewed the HOA documents and reported that the HOA appeared financially stable. Escrow closed in January 2023. In March 2023, 2 months after closing, the HOA board convened a special meeting. I was retained by 3 unit owners, including the newly closed buyers, to evaluate the structural conditions that had prompted the special meeting. The building's reserve study showed a reserve funding percentage of 18%, critically below the CAI minimum recommendation of 70%. The reserve study had been performed 3 years prior and had not been updated. The buyer's attorney had noted the low funding percentage, but had characterized it as common for older Florida buildings without quantifying the special assessment exposure. That exposure, calculated as the gap between the current reserve balance and the fully funded reserve target divided by the number of units, was $43,000 per unit. My forensic inspection of the below-grade parking structure documented widespread chloride-induced reinforcing steel corrosion with active spalling on 8 of the 12 support columns, delamination of the parking deck slab soffit over approximately 30% of the deck area, and section loss in 3 beam members that I assessed as requiring immediate temporary shoring pending structural repair. The parking structure had last been waterproofed in 2001, 22 years prior, more than double the 15-year expected service life of the membrane system that had been installed. The reserve study from 3 years prior had projected a waterproofing replacement cost of $380,000. The actual structural repair scope, driven by the deferred waterproofing replacement, was now projected at $1.2 million, more than 3 times the projected cost, because the membrane had not been replaced when it was due. The pending litigation file included a 2-year-old construction defect claim related to the building's original waterproofing installation, a slip and fall claim in the pool area that the HOA's insurer had partially denied coverage for, and a unit owner lawsuit against the board for failure to maintain the parking structure, filed by a unit owner whose vehicle had been damaged by falling concrete spall. The governance instability was documented in the meeting minutes from the prior 24 months, which showed 3 board member resignations, a management company change, and 2 annual meetings that had failed to achieve quorum. Every single one of these warning signs was present and documented in the HOA records that were legally required to be provided to those buyers during escrow. The special assessment levied to fund the parking structure repair was $22,000 per unit, due in 120 days. The retired couple, on a fixed income, had not budgeted for a $22,000 cash obligation 2 months after closing on a $640,000 retirement purchase. That is not bad luck. That is a preventable financial disaster that a proper document review would have caught before a single dollar of earnest money was deposited. Before you purchase any property governed by an HOA, you pull the reserve study and you find the percent funded number. You hire a structural engineer to walk the common elements and evaluate the physical condition of the parking structure, the roofing system, and the building envelope. You read the litigation disclosure with your own eyes, not just a summary, and you read the last 24 months of board meeting minutes, looking specifically for resignations, management changes, quorum failures, and delinquency rate disclosures. Those 4 actions will tell you everything you need to know about whether the community you are buying into is a sound investment or a liability wearing a fresh coat of paint and a reasonable monthly assessment. I am Engineer Vance. Protect your structure. Protect your investment.